Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Sound Decisions here on Passion for Sound. And today it's part 2 of my interview with Zach and Bevin from ZMF or ZMF Headphones. If you haven't yet seen part 1, I'll put a link in the description below. I recommend you go and watch that first because this is a continuation of that very same discussion. So we laid a lot of the groundwork for what's to come in part 1 and it's worth watching first. In part 2, we start delving into a bit more detail and I think things get really interesting. Bevin and Zach talk about things like how long it takes them to design a headphone from the time they first come up with the concept, designing the driver, working out how it's going to sound, how long all that process takes. I also asked why they tend to lean towards 300 ohm drivers and we get a fantastic and really well thought out answer to that. And then also a couple of other bits of interest such as things like how often their drivers come back for warranty because they have a lifetime warranty, and also how Zach goes about tuning the headphones, whether it's a measurement based process, a subjective process, or a little bit of both. So as always, apologies for the drop in quality in terms of video and audio. This is built on a Zoom recording, but hopefully you'll find the quality of content from Zach and Bevin far outweighs the drop in video and audio quality. I hope you enjoy the video. Here's Zach and Bevin for part 2 of my interview with ZMF Headphones.
Let's shift into a bit more of the technicalities now. How long does it take? Let's say you're coming up with a brand new headphone. How long would you expect it to take you based on your past experience to go from that product concept all the way through to actually saying, you know what, it's ready to go on the website and be sold to people as a retail product?
I used to be on a cycle of one headphone per year, but since the pandemic happened and I wore a lot more hats and the business has grown, it's slowed down a bit. But I mean, it's kind of like making a film or making a drawing or any other piece of art or craft. I mean, you kind of go and go and go. You take breaks from it. You come back, you do the different elements. You go to your engineer, you go measure it a bunch, you put it, you say, oh, I'm tired. I need a week off from this. My ears are ringing, all that stuff. And then you come back to it with a fresh mind and try to see things, you let people listen to it. I mean, usually it takes, somewhere, for me, it takes from concept until when I have the parts or changing things. I mean, it depends on if the driver's designed or not. If we're saying from inception of like finding a brand new driver, designing a new driver, changing the elements of any part of the headphone, it could probably 2 years. But as far as once I've designed the driver, have the parts in hand, it probably takes me around a year from just thinking about what I want to do to actually releasing it. Things have sped up a little bit since we have better equipment now. Now I have a hats unit, had a 5-axis CNC machine. Back in when I had to hire people out or go find different methods of getting people to listen to it, getting different measurements, the more DIY method, kind of pre-2016 ZMF. It took a little longer, a little more effort, but now that we're the size we are, it's a little faster to do that stuff. But at the same time, now that I've made more headphones, my ideas are a little crazier, so that can take me a little longer because I'll go down paths that don't always lead to what I want.
Yeah, makes sense. And we will circle back around to what might be in the pipeline, and also if you could do anything at all, cost no object, what would it be? But we'll save that towards the end as a finishing point. So
Teaser.
Exactly. No. Keep people on the hook. One thing I'm curious about, I don't know if this was in the list of questions, but it does relate to some of the questions that the patrons put forward. From what I'm hearing from you, you have the design in mind and then you're going to external providers to obviously produce things that are very unique, like drivers and the like. But from what I'm hearing, you're actually saying this is how I need the driver designed in the following aspects. So with that in mind, 2 questions, and I'm going to ask them together, but I'm recognizing there might be 2 different answers you need to give.
Sure.
One of them is why 300 ohm headphones? And tacked onto that is also why dynamic and not planar, particularly given your roots in the 250 RP. Why have you chosen the driver designs that you have to date?
I guess I'll do the dynamic planar one first, and then we'll go to the 300 ohm thing. The dynamic driver thing, and maybe it was part of just that, like, my first really high-end headphone was a Hi-Fi Man HE500. I think I bought it new and right when it came out, which I don't know, was that like 2008, 2009?
Yeah, that sounds about right. That was when I
Yeah,
was fairly new to the hobby myself, I think. So that sounds
yeah,
about
so I
right.
bought it right when it came out, and before that I was really into IEMs. Like Zach 2001 to 2007 was just buying IEMs like crazy because I was in school and um, yeah, so it kind of went that gamut of stuff, and then got into the hi-fi mans. And I think I just was so used to the planar sound that I had, when I went, looking for people to make my driver design ideas, the market was getting inundated so much with planars. Odyssey was coming out with new headphones, Hi-Fi Man, Mr. Speakers was coming out with great headphones in that market. And it is still something I would love to get back to. And no, we don't have a planar coming out, but I think at the time I was just so, I found ways to make them, and I, actually spent all this time figuring out how to make them locally and everything. But I was just, the dynamic drivers just to my ear at the time sounded more exciting, probably because me as an audiophile was just kind of had fatigue from listening to planar so much, because they do have a very, distinct sound. They have that kind of weighty feel to them. The treble has, has that kind of throws at you. It comes from the panel. It's not nodal, all that stuff. So that was kind of probably, I think, what threw me towards dynamic drivers. And as far as the 300 ohm drivers, part of what, I always have loved acoustic guitars, as you know, and instruments. And as any of us hobbyists know, the part of being into headphones is being into the gear. And I really like hearing how gear changes how my headphones sound. And, quickly noticed way back in the day when I was starting with all this, that a low impedance driver, while you do very quickly change the damping factor from the source you're listening to, say you have a 32 ohm driver, you have a less of a range of equipment you can use, because especially OTL tube amps or any of those, you quickly get to a damping factor that's just going to you can't use a 32 ohm driver with a 100 ohm output on the amp. It's just going to sound, your damping factor is going to be 1/3. So you're going to get, very murky sound, not defined. And so the 300 ohm driver, you have so many more choices, and you can even go down to the very lowest, Rupert Nev RNHP amp with a 0.00001 output impedance and get a certain type of sound. But then you can also go all the way up to an amp that has a 100 ohm output impedance, like a ZMF Pendant or the Bayer Dynamic A2 solid state amp. And it just gives you a lot more choices and a lot more variance in what you can get from your headphone. And I don't know, it's always fun going through that experience with a new ZMF owner, if someone's never used a 300 ohm headphone before, of just like, hey, like you can really kind of like, you're not going to change the character of the headphone per se, but you can kind of tailor the sound a little bit to like what your personal preference is, just as far as the transients and how the attack and decay is, and what you're getting from the damping factor that you're putting into your headphones. And so, yeah, I just feel like it lets you hear your chain more. And I also, with the voice coil being 300 ohms, there is I've made all the drivers in different iterations of 300 ohms, 100 ohms, 150 ohms, 80 ohms, 32. And as you change with the same membrane material and start to listen to all the versions, there's a difference in tactility, because the weight of the voice coil is different based on how it's wound and how the wire they're using and what the wire is made of. And so once you start experimenting and hearing all the differences between all those different materials as you use them, you can get very close frequency responses, but you see the change in impulse response, you see the change in distortion, and that all leads to kind of a different experience you have as a listener. And so it's kind of, I just found that the 300 ohm drivers had more of a density to the treble that I really like. And it just, along with being able to change the sound from your source, it gives you a weight to the music when it's properly amped that you don't quite get from a driver with a lesser impedance. That being said, we are, and everybody's been asking us, we are making a headphone that we've been working on for a long time now that will be an 80 ohm drive, easier to drive, less than $1,000 closed back headphone. I don't have a release date or anything like that. We're still trying to keep up, but that is something that's down the line. And maybe I'll show you guys a prototype later And, I can just blanketly say coming in 2022, I don't know when, because we do have some infrastructure things to work on so we can support that model.
Oh, that's exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Really interesting what you're saying about the voice coil design, because there's been this long held, I don't know if it's a strong belief, but there's always been discussions around the beyerdynamic models that come in the multiple impedances. So you've got your 80s, your 250s, and your 300s, or the 150, so 80, 150, 300, I think it was. There's often been talk that the 300 ohm sounds the best of those. And yet, if you look at them on paper, there's not huge differences. Like you were saying, the frequency responses are pretty similar. So that makes a lot of sense, that just that extra weight, like the physical, mechanical side of the driver movement, is going to be different purely because the structure is different. So that's really interesting to hear that's something that goes into the decision-making process.
Yeah, Bayer makes a lot of studio professional like headphones, and I haven't talked to their engineers or anything, but it would be interesting to know, just because we make audiophile headphones, and I know a lot of those are also geared towards studio professionals. It'd be interesting to know what if there's a difference in how studios are made for recording equipment. That's part of it too, which I actually don't know the answer to.
I do recall, and whether this is the only reason or there's probably more to it than this, I do recall speaking to somebody about this, and I don't remember who it was. It was way, way, way ago. One of the reasons that a lot of the studio headphones were high impedance, like say 300 ohm, was that if you had multiple people working, you're plugging into the same device, it wasn't dropping the impedance down to silly levels. So it could be as basic as that. But it also might have a bit more to it. I'm not sure. And I do also think that the idea of having what you mentioned before, the impedance matching side of things is a big part of it too, because the old standards of impedance outputs, or output impedance, I should say, was a lot higher. And therefore you needed, just like you do with the OTL amps now, you needed the high impedance to actually match effectively with the output impedance of those recording and mixing studio devices. So so there's probably a few elements and factors going on in there, but I like the fact that, as you say, it allows your headphones to be much more variable with different devices, because I do find here with, if I get a tube amp come through and the tube amp's got high output impedance, I look at the headphones on the wall and I go, nope, to bunt to the headphones, because they're just not going to work effectively with a high output impedance. So having that flexibility is possibly more valuable than people realize. I think that's really, really cool. While we're talking about design decisions, the headphone band, so the headband design in the ZMF headphones is quite unique, but also looks a bit familiar, which, I mean, every headband's going to have similar characteristics because they have to do the same job. Where did that design come from? Was it based on something else you really liked and you said, oh, I love how headphone X feels from manufacturer Y, I'm going to do my own version of that? Or was it completely bespoke on your part? Where did it all come from?
Yeah, I mean, the real truth is it just came from a desire to make something modular. And I remember when I was coming up with the actual metal piece, I ripped open like 3 or 4 headphones and just basically ruined them because I needed to figure out the exact thickness the steel band needed to be, because you flame tempered the steel, you're going to bend it into a shape. And I just I was just learning at that point 7-8 years ago what what needed to happen, because my background's not in mechanical engineering, and I work with a number of mechanical engineers, but needed to figure out all of that stuff so we could design it. And so that, along with the desire to have something just totally modular and could be replaced by anyone, because a lot of headphones you'll see have injection molded parts, and so we had to did not have the budget to do injection molded parts at all, and wanted something modular, and so it kind of didn't leave us with a ton of options, and in the end it has led us, and we actually are probably going to tweak the shape of the headband just a tiny bit in the next year or so, just to make them come a little more comfortably, or make us actually at the factory do less bending before they get shipped out. But overall, it was mostly that desire to have something modular that could be replaced easily and not have to do any injection molded parts. I do realize there's probably similarities of it to what some other brands do. I know the whole fold out thing. Some headphone brands do that where because it spins in a 360 manner. And I know the detents are similar to other headphones in some ways, but it definitely comes together in a way that kind of looks uniquely ZMF. I think at this point with all the different aspects to it.
Yeah, definitely, and that I think that's part of where that question probably came from, is the fact that it's clearly different from anybody else's, but at the same time, like I said before, all headbands are going to have some similarity, so that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to jump forwards. Actually, no, I'm going to ask this one question because I think it's really interesting. One of the questions put forward was, you've got a lifetime warranty on drivers, which, as they've said, is a great feature. How often do people actually need to claim that warranty? Do people blow up your drivers very often?
Every so often there's like, I plugged it in, something happened, there was a loud pop from my amp, and now, there's no sound coming out of the right channel. Send it in, we got you covered most of the time. As long as it's not user damage, very obviously. But
we wish that we could, there's the side between it that's like, us as people who just want to help everybody, and us as people running a business who have to have rules and stuff so that we can keep making the headphones that we make. And we've just found that keeping the warranty to the first owner has been best for us. And as everybody knows, we're always going to help anyone who owns a ZMF, whether they're their first owner or not, out as easily as we can. And even if that means charging something for a driver replacement, we're still going to do it. But yeah, it doesn't seem to happen that much. I mean, the stuff that seems to happen the most is someone buying a used headphone and wanting to be cleaned up, or some of the very early magnesium gimbals every once in a while would have a little bit of chipping happen. We have changed the design of that to have the paint stay on a little better from when it gets knocked around, just because there were more hard corners on the early versions of that, where it's very radiused now. So people getting their chassis changed out or something like that. But the drivers, usually it's a tube amp popping and blowing the drivers, usually what happens. And regardless if it was someone else's amp, or I burned in my headphones at 300 dB, or the very rare occasion where a dynamic driver will just give out for some unknown reason, which usually it's the voice coil, because the wire snapping for whatever reason. That's just part of, something that can happen, and, we're happy to replace it. And yeah, fortunately, it hasn't been something that's been that prevalent. So
yeah, drivers are not something we see often, unless one of the things that Zach said. And I don't know if anybody's ever checked out our YouTube channel, but the ZMF YouTube channel, just in terms of like, things that may need tune-ups on the headphone or how-tos, we try to provide a channel with, here's how your chassis goes together, if you want to kind of figure that out. Here's how you can bend your headband to get a better clamp. So sort of related to the longevity of the headphone and the lifetime warranty, we also really try to help an owner feel like they have some sort of like maintenance manual. Like with your car, you have to get an oil change. With keeping up your ZMF headphones, here's what you can do to keep your heirloom possession that you care a lot about in tip-top shape. And so we really try to provide a roadmap to that for our owners.
Working on getting more content on there. As soon as I find a moment. I got some videos I need to edit for it.
Oh, that's great. And I'll put a link down below. I was aware, only because I think I tagged you in the Atticus review. I tagged the brand and saw that, you guys have got a YouTube channel. That was about the only reason I knew about it. But I'll check it out myself, and B, I will link it in the description below so people can go and have a look when they've watched this interview. Let's dive deep now. There's a few questions around this, and rather than going individually, I'm going to throw them all at you at once, and you can just take us on a bit of a journey. So this is all about how you go about tuning a headphone. and I'll tell you all the questions, but feel free just to tell the story in the way that you want, and we'll see what we touch on, what we don't. So some of the sorts of things people were interested to know was how the wood impacts the sound, whether there's whether there are particular products that you use as reference when designing and tuning. So, you know, are you trying to make it sound like a warmer verite or a more neutral Atticus or whatever it might be? Is there something that you start with in mind as a target, or do you actually just start with a design you think would be cool and see how it sounds and then tweak it as you go? And also, what's the balance between subjective listening versus taking measurements of headphones in your tuning process? So with all that in mind, just talk us through the tuning process. You're designing a new headphone. How does it all happen in terms of tuning?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a, you know, I read Reddit and Headfight, Super Best Audio Friends, headphones.com. You know, I watch all the YouTube channels and everything. I know in the last, I don't know, when I started it, there wasn't as much of a push towards this stuff. And I don't actually know what year, but, you know, I remember reading Sean Olive's paper on the Harman curve a few years ago. And, you know, as Reddit headphones has gotten more popular, you know, the objectivist approach has definitely taken hold more. And, you know, that's the thing, we sell headphones to all sides. And I would consider myself kind of the subjectivist's objectivist in a way. I know that makes no sense, but it's just that you know, at the end of it, the enjoyable experience I want to have is a subjective one. That's who we're making our headphones for. But what that also means is the only way to do that is to objectively understand what will give us that subjectively good experience. And so for me, at this point, the way I tune headphones is I won't even listen to it until it measures in a way that I think I'm going to like, you know, because I don't even want to, now that I've gone through, you know, the last 10, 11 years of measuring headphones on all my different rigs. And now that we have, you know, audio precision measurement, Gross 43 AG, or not for AG, they're the AECM 206 audio precision rigs. I think they're the most like the Gross 45 CA is what they're most like. And then we have a hats unit from, you know, the new Brule and Care hats unit here that we, this guy that we got, you know, this last year, my friend. And so, yeah, you know, I know what I want to hear. I'm very aware I have curves for all the frequency, you know, Harman curve. I know Critical has a curve now. I know that Andrew at headphones.com has some curves he likes. You know, I kind of look at all those, and I'm definitely aware of them. And after I tune a headphone, I'm aware of like where a headphone meets those and doesn't meet those. And I have my own preference where I know it fits into that in a curve that I like, that, you know, we tune our headphones to, which isn't like any of those other ones, but has a lot of characteristics. But at the end of the day, you know, one thing I have found is that, especially as we've been working on this 80 ohm headphone that's a little lighter and it will be under $1,000, is that not all drivers will sound the same when tuned to any of those specific curves. So you just, each headphone, even if it's the same driver, open versus closed, you can't tune to the same curve and expect to have the same subjective experience. And so it's like anything that way. You can listen to it and then think you know how it's going to measure, but then you'll go and look at the measurements. It might be different. In the same way, other way around, you can measure it as much as you want. Look at the distortion, look at the spectral decay, you know, look at the impulse response, all that stuff, and then go listen to it and think it's going to sound, it will sound different. And so you really have to, I really combine the two. And, you know, even though I won't listen to something until it measures a certain way, I'll then have to save that frequency response graph, go listen to it, and try to identify what I don't like that I'm hearing in my subjective experience, find where it is in the graph, find whether it's something I can easily identify, figure out what the change is going to be, whether it's going to be moving the ear closer or further away. Is the baffle air venting have to be different? Is the back air venting going to have to be different? Do I have to slow the air velocity down when inside the cup? How can I do that? You know, what materials do we have? And so more or less way I'm better at tuning now, and I feel like every headphone I come out with is the best one I've done, obviously, because that's what keeps me going. But is that I've, every time I make a new headphone, that kind of toolbox of my experience gets expanded, and I'm able to identify those things faster, have better tools like, HATS unit, have more, insight into what those changes need to be. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that specifically says like, hey, this is exactly how I tune a headphone, but I don't go, and I think any engineer or artist or craftsperson could go into a project that they've never done before. And that's the thing about headphone tune that's so exciting, is that every headphone you can go in and you're going to have different challenges based on the newness of it all, and my goal is to never just make headphones that are, here's the $300 version of the same, here's the $900 version that's a little better, and here's the $4,000 version that's a little better. It's always to create something new that's different and great in a different way than anything I've ever made. And so that's what keeps it exciting for me.
That's great. I think one of the things I think is really interesting there is the idea that the different tunings of the same drivers, even the same, whether it's open back or closed back, or sorry, the different drivers, I should say, or whether it's closed or open back, that they can sound so different. I think that's a really key thing that I recently reviewed the SonarWorks Sound ID software that applies those calibration curves to essentially make a headphone as close as possible to a flat response. And the thing that really stood out to me in doing that was I could take 3 or 4 different headphones from behind me here, bring them to a flat response, and they all still sound completely different. Some suit it well and some don't suit it well at all. So I think that is really interesting. Have you got any explanation as to what causes that? And I'll ask that a bit of a different way. What do you think are the factors that you're taking into account if you've got, let's say you're designing an open headphone and a closed headphone that ultimately are going to be twins. So you want them to be a similar headphone within your range, but obviously you're going to be adjusting the tuning slightly because one is open, one is closed. What would you be taking into account and tweaking there, would you expect?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things about, the head transfer function that I don't, fully understand, but there's definitely a lot of stuff in my experience that I've found, especially between going through open and closed headphones. And part of that is just that, I remember when I was doing the Verite and the Verite closed, I actually matched the frequency response curves, because I did the Verite open first and I did the Verite closed. And I just hated the way the Verite closed sounded when it was matched to the Verite open's frequency response. And what I realized was that when you have an open headphone, the back is completely open. The air doesn't have as much stuff to bounce off of, that's coming from the driver, bouncing off the back. It's not coming back and creating any phase issues or anything like that. Whereas in the closed headphone, that sound is bouncing off all this stuff before it gets to your ear because it's closed. And so even though that sound may get to the pinea or to your eardrum and create the same volume or generally the same volume in a frequency response graph, the way it's getting there is completely different. And so I've realized that there's certain parts of the frequency response that kind of have to change to allow the ear to get the right amount of ear pressure in the right frequencies to give a pleasurable experience. And that's, a lot of times I've heard people be like, oh, like the Verite has this smooth frequency response, from, 40 Hertz through 3K, but then the Verite closed, oh, it's very W shaped and this and that. And, yes, you can look at the frequency response graph and it is, sounding different. But I think when you listen to a Verite next to a Verite closed with the stock pads, which would be Universe on the Verite open and Otor on the Verite closed, that if you were to try to match the frequency responses, the experience would actually be more different than it would be alike. With the same pads, which I know is kind of a weird thing to say because it's impossible for anyone who owns the two headphones to do because of how we tuned them. But but that is kind of why they didn't end up in the same spot, even though I, could have gone to that place. It all has to do with how the air is getting to the eardrum. And, it's just, it's completely different in an open and closed headphone for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. I reviewed a while ago the Beyerdynamic T5, the 3rd generation, and I personally love it. I bought myself a pair. It's one of the wonkiest frequency responses I've ever seen in a headphone, I think, but something about it just works in that closed format. So it's really interesting to hear you say that about the Verite closed becoming this kind of W-shaped frequency response, because that's very similar to what I'm yet to hear the Verites, but it's very similar to what the frequency response is in general terms, in the sense that it's kind of lumpy and bumpy in this W shape from the T5, and yet it somehow works. To look at it on paper, you'd go, that's going to sound like rubbish, but it actually sounds, it's very coloured, but it's got a sense of rightness that still works, even though on paper you'd look at it and go, there's something wrong here. So that's really interesting to hear that that's probably something to do with the closed nature of it and the reflections and the sound pressure inside the cup. That's really cool.